The way we are consuming content is changing by the day, but what does this ever-revolving landscape mean for the future of media and the entertainment world as a whole? Join us here at the New York Stock Exchange to break it all down is Seth Schachner. He is the managing director at Strat America, a consulting firm which works with media and technology clients. General man about town, appreciate you being here. Thanks a lot.
Awesome to be here, JD. Real pleasure.
Of course. So before we get into the specifics of YouTube and media distribution, just a bit of a personal question.
Sure.
Where does Seth Schachner consume his media these days?
Oh my gosh, a lot of it's the phone, basically, the home entertainment system and the car, kind of in that order. And they're all really key ways for me to absorb it all, for sure.
So we've really seen that as a shift over the last, let's say, decade. More and more mobile. I hear that from media distribution companies, right? That's where the eyeballs are.
I think the mobile phone is probably the most, understated thing that's changed things tremendously. And I watched that even when the first iPhone came out, 2007 time frame. It's been an enormous factor, that and the app ecosystem, for sure, basically, yeah.
Yeah, let's get into it about YouTube specifically, because we are so far beyond the era of traditional cable news and being dialed in. We're a generation of cord cutters. We're going to new distribution outlets, and YouTube really seems to have established really dominant market share in terms of live TV and so many other offerings. What do you see there with that product?
It's, they're calling it king of all media now, and it's an interesting thing for me. It's outpacing, traditional linear TV and streaming these days, and it's aggregating tons of stuff, from sports to short form and user-generated content. I've watched it from something that was initially what we call a UGC, a user gen vehicle, that brought lots of stuff. I come from the music industry originally, lots of stuff that we didn't even know was in our catalogs that millions of people were watching. And, it's evolved into something that's kind of sitting between traditional media and new media. And I think it's probably in a primo position to capitalize that, particularly as, pay TV continues to decline, basically. But I think a little bit underrepresented. There's a lot of potential there for it.
Do you feel like it's worth it for people? They always consider, okay, do I pay a little bit more to be able to skip through ads? And that's the big one, right? I feel like that's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the big fight, the negotiation between the distributors and the consumers. Are you willing to pay a little bit more to skip those ads, or are you okay to wait 30 seconds, 60 seconds and sit through them?
Well, they're in a really unique position because, putting aside what the analysts think about the under potential of the advertising, they can always go higher on the ad business. I mean, it's Google. It's one of the very biggest advertising machines there is in the globe. So you're starting out from that perspective very, very strong. But subscription business is an increasingly big part of their business. To me, when I look at digital businesses, you got to have a couple of engines, and I see subscription as being, a much bigger part of the business, particularly if they're picking up things like, the NFL, or if you're going to start seeing other types of content landing in there. So it's a really good story, for sure.
In the history of television, we've always talked about what's called the key advertising demo, those younger, more impressionable viewers, and perhaps you can establish a brand relationship with them early on, with the hope from the brand perspective that relationship continues for the rest of their consuming life. Where is that advertising demo leaning towards today?
It's interesting. They are so big and broad and multi-platform and successful, so I totally agree with you on the younger ones, particularly the ones that follow Mr. Beast and all the influencers we'll talk about. But there's this whole phenomenon with connected TVs. I'm sure you got one sitting in your house, and it's probably one of the first things you're clicking on when you go onto the connect, whether it's the Samsung channels or not. And they're seeing a lot of growth from the connected TV, and that's older, actually. That's not the younger kids. So they got a lot of stuff all across the board to compete with Netflix and Amazon.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those influencers. You mentioned Mr. Beast. Who are the other kind of top names that are establishing their own market share? What are they doing so well and so uniquely or inventively in the space? Because trying to see where the puck is going for media distribution seems like an impossible task, but some influencers are clearly doing it really well.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not in the demo. That's probably the expert on influencers for the younger kids, but Charli D'Amelio, Addison Rae, even the older skewing stuff. I mean, the Kardashians are influencers. Taylor Swift's an influencer. And I think what's really interesting there is strategically, these are things that are becoming their own businesses now. And they need less and less of the middleman, folks coming from places like I've worked, like a Sony or studios. They can kind of do it on their own. And that's brands, premium partnerships, fan clubs. So I think that's a really important factor that I think YouTube's a big beneficiary, but I think smart media companies now can kind of incorporate that with streaming services as well, who we're not talking about today, but they're an important part of the vehicle, the overall success of the media business as well.
Is there such a thing as influencer fatigue, I wonder, and at what point do we cross over that mark where people say, all right, I've seen enough of this. Every time I open up my screen, I'm seeing the same faces promote different products. What does that look like?
I mean, I would bet Hollywood's hoping for that, because I think a lot of the influencer stuff is really starting to like shift away. For the Gen Z stuff that you're starting to see now, they care less and less about traditional Hollywood content. They, Charlie D'Amelio is going to mean a lot more Mr. Beast than Brad Pitt is to someone who's in that age demographic.
Wow.
And so, I think it's going to keep shifting personally, and I think we're seeing that. We talk a little about Minecraft, but you're seeing what happens when Hollywood starts to hit on that potential interest from Gen Z. They get these explosively successful things that come out like Minecraft. So definitely the center of gravity is changing for sure.
Imagine saying that 20 years ago, that at one point Brad Pitt might be, respectfully, a bit less relevant to younger consumers than someone named Mr. Beast, but that does underscore the generational shifts that we've seen. Are there ways that the Hollywood studios are leveraging, that you see influencer talent, even if it's for, like, let's say, post-production promotions, right, and lean into that sort of stuff?
I mean, and I think the record's been kind of mixed, actually, right? I think probably all the studios are figuring out, how can we copy Minecraft, right? How could we do this? And you see things like Barbie, or I think it was Five Nights and Freddy, that was also very, very successful. But I don't know, Snow White, a lot of Gen Zers wanted to go see that, right? So I think they're looking to kind of move away from this old IP and figuring out, what's going to play out with the Gen Z folks, and that may be buying video game companies. Disney's got some investments in some, or it may be partnering with them. There are things like TV shows that will be done between the agencies and some of these influencer stars, but these are different worlds right now, and I think we're talking about the big stars. There's a whole influencer economy out there, which neither of us have heard of the stars or the brands involved, that are all trying to develop it. So I kind of see it as a different galaxy than, say, the traditional media world.
For sure. You've mentioned a Minecraft movie here a few times. What is that brand, that franchise doing really well, specifically in this moment? Because I feel like I cannot even go an hour of my day without somewhere coming across it, especially the last couple weeks, understandably.
Yeah. I mean, I sat with my young people last night at dinner trying to find out what the chicken jockey means, the definition.
I love that.
Yeah. So, no, I think that's probably some part of the future for the young people and for traditional entertainment companies, basically. And that particular one, a lot of reviewers called it stupid and didn't like it, and I don't think the young people care. And I was just sort of thinking about my generation. We had a Rocky Horror Picture Show, or punk rock with bands like the Ramones can play 3 chords, and that was cool to us because it was kind of disruptive. And I'm trying to understand, what Minecraft's all about to the younger demographics that are going nuts in theaters, basically. So I don't really know fully yet, but there's clearly potential there.
Through the world of influencers, obviously the social media platforms are so important, and a lot of them are owned by publicly traded companies like Meta, right, which now owns an Instagram and a Facebook, and you got some private companies that are doing really well in the space. Do you view the relationship between those social media companies and Hollywood as being adversarial, or do they sort of rely and kind of need one another? Are they foes who rely on one another in a strange way?
It's a great question. I think it's somewhere between those things. When I was at Sony Music, and seeing Facebook come out for the first time, it was also a different galaxy. What, these guys sell advertising and they're not going to pay us for our content, and now the artists can go out and build their own communities and they don't need us. And I think to some degree, artists, celebrities, influencers can build their own communities. They don't need the middlemen anymore. And so it's somewhere between those two worlds. My friends who work at Facebook and Insta will tell me, oh, we love the labels and we're here to help, but they're also selling tools. They're trying to develop advertising businesses. They got a ton of regulatory stuff. And so I don't know if it's completely there yet. I think I'd look to things like Spotify or some of the traditional streamers as being, say, closest to the entertainment or the media world. And you're starting to see some changes with them, with Spotify, not just with videos and podcasts, but with things like new streaming strategies that look at influencers and fan clubs. So, but it's a mix right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Spotify because they have also done the kind of pivot to vertical video. I feel like TikTok has come in and sort of blown up the business model in many ways for so many competitors.
Yeah.
I scroll through LinkedIn, I see TikTok style videos. I scroll through every platform, I now see TikTok style videos. What does that look like? I feel like there's a little bit of Mark Zuckerberg energy there. If you can't beat them either try and buy them or replicate their core product?
I think, I will say for TikTok particularly, they've become a vehicle for breaking talent or creating movie marketing strategies that can really help more than, say, some of the traditional stuff. Yeah. And so I think that's one way to think about it. There's been a lot of debate in some of the industries I've worked in, how long do these stars last that TikTok breaks? Are they going to go away in 90 days because of the attention span? Or are you looking at the new Bruce Springsteen or, the next great writer? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but I think there's so much attention, it's taking it away for sure from TV networks and streaming. And I definitely think the future is going to be about these guys more than it is some of the old school pay TV linear folks.
Absolutely. Finally, before I let you go, any predictions for what happens with TikTok? It's a big political story. There's geopolitics involved, and obviously, in terms of tech, consumer-facing companies.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a massive story.
It's going to go to an American interest. I don't know if I should say the one I think it'll go to, but whatever. I think there's a guy named Steve Mnuchin that I think was not in the press a lot. My betting would be on him and his team. But I think any buyer that gets it is going to need TikTok to cooperate with it, basically. Mm-hmm. So you don't want them to hate you if you've suddenly been taken away from them, and you're going to need to plug in a U.S. version of this to the version that comes out of China. So I think that's a really tough thing that people aren't talking about. The other thing is that there's a financial structure. There's already American investors in it, right? There's a bunch of private equity firms that are in there. The thing could be recapitalized, basically, non-dramatically, and so it doesn't really have to look that different than what it is now.
Sure.
But I bet they'll find a way to shift it, and I guess with all this tariff stuff going on, I don't know. Those are wild cards to me, but it'll probably get shifted over.
Because you mentioned Mnuchin, is his status in the conversation emboldened further because he just so happens to be the former Treasury Secretary for the once again
I don't
president?
know. I don't have any inside information. I don't know, but maybe you could prognosticate that. But I think some of the buyers that I think the press focuses on, I don't know where all that's coming from, and I think you do have to look at who's strategically positioned, in terms of the buying potential there. But maybe not. There's a bunch of bidders there, and I think it'll be fought over, I don't think China wants to give that thing up, basically, or the algorithm.
Of course.
So, but I will say for this discussion, it's an enormous vehicle for entertainment, for music, and I think any rights holder that wants to have artists or talent or films broken on it needs to still have it there.
Absolutely. Fascinating conversation. It really is.
Great
on
to
this
be here.
and all topics. Seth Schachner of Strat Americas, thanks a lot for joining us. Great to have you.